everything that's in 23 and 24. So it'll be hard to talk about what's in chapter 22 without getting into those two chapters. How many we got left, Harold? 3 left. Up, there's 2, there's 3. We're good, all right. Chapter 22 is a little longer than the chapters we've been looking at, but that's all right. I hope that all of you find the reading of the text beneficial. I thought about just coming into class and starting cold, but if we don't read it together, that means there's probably going to be some folks in class that haven't even read it until we get into it. So this is the way I wanted to start it. Seems to be working well now that we've been doing it for 2 quarters. All right, who's got the first section? Starts with verse 1.
Chapter 22?
Chapter 22, verse 1. All right, get us cranked off.
Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how that he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed.
And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat. So they said to him, Where do you want us to prepare it? He said to them, Behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him to the house in which he entered. Then you shall say to the master of the house, The teacher says to you, Where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large furnished upper room. There make ready. So they went and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover.
When the hour had come, he find at the table with the apostles with him. He said unto them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I shall never again eat in the temple with you of God. When he had taken the cup and gave thanks, he said, Take this and share it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the kingdom of God comes. When he had taken some bread, he gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. That same hour he took the cup and when he had eaten, saying, This cup is poured out for you, is the new covenant in my blood. And behold, the hand of one who prayed me is with me on the table. For he, the Son of Man, is going, that it has been eternally. So woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they begin to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who is going to do this thing.
And there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest. And he said to them, The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But it is not this way with you. But the one who is the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like a servant. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials. And just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. But he said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. Then he said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny 3 times that you know me. And he said to them, when I sent you without money bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything? So they said, nothing. Then he said to them, but now he who has money bag, let him take it, and likewise the knapsack, and he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. So they said, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough.
And he came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. When he arrived at the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Now an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow, and said to them, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not enter into temptation.
While he was still speaking, behold, a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was preceding them, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? When those who were around him saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answered and said, stop, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders who had come against him, have you come out with swords and clubs as you would against a robber? While I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this hour and the power of darkness are yours.
Having arrested him, they led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. But Peter was following at a distance. After they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter was sitting among them. And a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the firelight and looking intently at him, said, this man was with him too. But he denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. A little later, another saw him and said, you are one of them too. But Peter said, man, I am not. After about an hour had passed, another man began to insist, saying, certainly this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean too. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are talking about. Immediately, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed.
And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly. And now the man who held Jesus mocked him and beat him. And having blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, prophesy, who is the one who struck you? And many other things they blasphemously spoke against him. As soon as it was day, the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, came together and led him into their council, saying, if you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, if I tell you, you will by no means believe. And if I also ask you, will by no means answer me or let me go. Hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God. And they all said, are you sure then the Son of God? So he said to them, you rightly say that I am. And they said, what further testimony do we need? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth.
What do you know about the Passover? How did it get started? In Egypt. Didn't get started in the Promised Land, it started in Egypt. People were in bondage, people were in slavery. It was the last plague. God would bring on the Egyptians, and with this last great plague, what would happen with Israel? They'd be set free. Moses came down and said, let my people go, let my people go, let my people go. Finally, people are released. Now, the struggle wasn't over yet, but they were no longer slaves after the Passover. Jesus comes, and they are preparing the Passover. And while they're preparing the Passover, there in verse 1, are getting ready to prepare it because it's approaching, the chief priests and scribes are seeking how they might do what? Do you see? It's as if God is a poet. And he tells us all about the Passover. For these folks, the Passover was about 1,500 years old. And what happens at the Passover? A lamb dies. They're preparing the Passover, and what are the leaders of Israel talking about? But killing the Lamb of God. Do they have a clue? They don't have a clue. They don't believe he's the Lamb of God. At least they don't admit to that, if they do. It's kind of like atheism. I think there are a lot of atheists that believe in God, but they know if they say that they do, they know then they'll be obligated to do what God says, and they don't want that, so they'll convince themselves. Can't be. Verse 3, what happens to Judas? What does that mean? Is Judas no longer under control of his own will? How can Satan get into a person?
Judas was a thief to start with. He stole money out of so he wasn't a good person anyway.
All right. I don't.
They're none good.
I try not to make too many judgments about people, but did you see the news last night where this guy stole a truck and he raced all over town, and the police finally got him stopped and they had to shoot him? And then one of his family members was saying, well, he's really a good guy. That was their perspective. I'm not trying to mock or make fun or anything. I'm just saying at some point we got to face who we are. And what determines who we are? I'm sorry?
Our behavior.
Our behavior determines what we are. You can say what you want, but if you're constantly telling lies, you're a liar. If you steal things, and I've seen this on cops. This guy's got a record 5 miles long, and the cops catch him and say, we were taking you to jail because you're a thief. It's a thief? I'm not a thief. What do you mean you're not a thief? Didn't you just steal out of this guy? I said, yeah, but I'm not a thief. Now, I've never done that myself. I always own up to everything I am and everything I do. I know you're exactly the same. See, it happens when we read the Bible that we tend to make judgment calls about other folks, but the whole point of God giving us the Scriptures is so we'll look at ourselves and examine ourselves to see, well, how do I really line up with this? Satan entered into Judas, and all that means is that Judas listened to the influence that he was getting. Look down in verse 6. 5, it says they were glad and they agreed to give him money, and he did what? He consented. He was not a zombie. He was wide awake. He knew exactly what was going on. He knew what he was doing. He'd been with Jesus for 3 years, and he's been a thief that whole time, and now he's finding a way to make some more money, and he consents. It's interesting to me that God inspired Luke to put that in the text, that Judas consented to this. Harold?
I don't know, but I've kind of thought in the past when Jesus first selected him, he probably was not that sort of guy. And I thought that perhaps as he followed along with Jesus, he kind of began to see who the Messiah was going to be, was this guy that was going to bring a physical kingdom to the Jews. And so, therefore, I thought he sort of began to lose interest in the fact of what Jesus was trying to do. And so, therefore, Satan was able to make use of him. I'll be kind of surprised if Jesus, first of all, selected somebody that was a thief and from the very beginning. I don't know that that's true, but I thought that I ought to give him that much credit, because
I would think Jesus would choose people of all sorts of backgrounds, but if he's choosing people to be apostles to come, I thought probably when he first selected him, maybe he was a man with better choices than he made toward the end. I don't know that's true, but that's my assumption.
One more verse, really? Again, it's like, what was the story on Judas? Now, somebody had something over here.
Well, I just wanted to get something clear in my mind. It said Judas was Simon's son. Was it Judas Iscariot or this Judas that was?
Judas
not?
Iscariot, yes.
Okay.
He's the one. Johnny? Now, it's also
And maybe on the
hands,
same line with Harold, I think it was a faith issue. I think probably he may at one point have been just like the other apostles. Paul, in himself, in his writing, wrote about being careful, pummeling his body, guarding against becoming a castaway himself. So it wasn't like these guys couldn't have fallen. That it wasn't like they didn't have issues or sin, some sin in their life. But they were apostles, and I think it was a question of faith. And I think somewhere, when that he allowed the temptation, most of us, maybe I shouldn't say everybody, we're tempted.
Sure.
But we don't always, all of us don't always give in.
Right.
So I think when he dropped his guard, he gave in to temptation, and of his own free will.
Of his own free will. To me, that's the point that needs to be made here. That this wasn't something forced on Judas. He made this choice. It wasn't forced on him to be a thief, but that's the commentary that we see earlier. Leslie's got her hand up. I try to recognize those who have their hands up. So if you, I thought I saw. PJ, did I see your hand up?
It's okay.
Okay.
And we've talked quite a bit in my Sunday morning class about how the whole time the apostles were looking for, or disciples were looking for, an earthly kingdom. And we brought up one time that Judas, we don't think necessarily thought that this was going to go anywhere. He's in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I'm going to get some money, be able to put it back into the treasury, and they're not going to know I'm stealing from it, and Jesus is going to wipe out these guys, rather than actually what takes place. And so he was under the misconception of the earthly kingdom still, rather than a heavenly kingdom.
It may well be. Do you find it interesting, though, that God doesn't say, I need to explain to everybody why Judas was the way he was? I mean, he could have. It probably would have taken 2 verses, and God could have said, this is why Judas did what he did. This is what was in Judas' mind. This is what he was thinking. But for whatever reason, he doesn't do that, except to show us, I think, sufficiently, that when Judas did what he did it of his own free will. That's really about the whole thing we know. Billy, and then Bud, and Pete, and James.
It's interesting because in Matthew 26 and verse, I'm just reading this. Verse 8. It's talking about Christ and the precious ornament what the woman put on him and everything.
Yes.
Listen to verse 8 here. It says, there came unto them a woman having an alabaster box, a very precious ornament, poured down on his head, and he set it meat. But his disciples saw it, and they had indignation. Not just Judas.
Right.
All the apostles were indignant at this situation with this woman taking the ornament and pouring it on Christ. So just because it happened to fall into Judas' situation, the other ones are indignant enough too that it could have happened to them. But yet I don't understand Judas's, but he did go in Matthew 26 over there also and talk 14, talk about he went to the high priest and said, what will you give me to betray you? And they told him 30 pieces of silver.
And it is written down that he was a thief.
Yes.
That's a pretty good indication of his character.
But just because he wasn't the only one indignant about that oil, though.
Right.
All the rest of the
It's a good
apostles
point. It's a good point. It's not like we never see the apostles, the rest of them, ever doing anything that they probably shouldn't have done. But
Well, the apostles did a lot of things or suggested, like wiping out the whole town.
Yeah.
They said, hey, we need to call down lightning from heaven, just wipe out the whole town.
what are they arguing about
They
here?
had the same, but I think that personal opinion, okay?
Okay.
I look at it and I say, Judas became disenchanted with Christ. He kept looking at it saying, he had all the powers that the other apostles had. So he wasn't slighted in any way, but he became disenchanted with the mission. And in other words, he didn't really understand the mission. And he said, that can't be all there is to it. It's just setting him up as the king, and and of course, I'll have my place in just like the mother that comes and says, I want you to make my sons 2 sons, one on your right, one on your left. Power, positions of power. And so if Judas is hearing all this, he goes,
Sure.
well, he's going to be on the right, going to be on the left. Where's there's room for me? I mean, am I going to be somebody great or in power? But like I say, he became disenchanted. And when he became disenchanted, he said, what can I do? And they said, well, it had rumored about that the priest said, we could pay to have him killed if we can find the guy with the money. I mean, if we've got the money in the temple and we've got the means, all we need is the man.
All right. And all these viewpoints that we are discussing tonight, and even the viewpoint that I've heard in the past that Judas was trying to provoke a catalyst of an event that would force Jesus to take the kingdom unto himself. That's what I'm saying. There's no passage anywhere that says this is why Judas did what it did, except that it says, verse 3, Satan entered his heart. So this...
He was the one that went to the high priest. They didn't come to him.
Sure.
He went to them, offered them a deal.
Did Jesus call anybody else Satan in the course of his ministry?
Well, he did call Peter Satan.
He called Peter's. What was Peter's issue? What did Jesus tell him? Yeah, Jesus said, they're going to arrest me. I'm going to be crucified. Peter said, not over my dead body. And Jesus said, well, he didn't say over my dead body. It's a way of saying things. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Why? You're not savoring the things of God, but the things of men. And I gotta keep asking myself that same question. Marty Kessler, what are you looking for in life? Yeah. And temptation is with us all the time. James is next. And was there another hint? Pete, you were next, weren't you? Well, James and then Pete.
Satan knows our weaknesses, and he used Judas, and he knew how to do it. Jesus didn't have faith to resist the temptation.
Well, now see, that's an interesting statement that he didn't have the faith.
Or he lacked enough faith to stand firm at that one point. He became weak.
Faith is such an interesting thing because if you have faith as a what? As a mustard seed, you can move them out.
If you don't act in that faith, or use that faith,
Now there you go. You see, there's a value system. You can have faith, but you can deny that faith. Well, that's not as attractive to me, even though I've got that kind of faith. What's attractive to me is 30 pieces of silver. Or whatever else it might be. How many people do you know who have, by way of speaking, sold their soul for something stupid? And they knew better. But at the time, it was what they wanted. And that's all they could focus on. Pete?
Well, Marty, the way I see it, Christ knew that Peter was going to betray him. Right? He was going to deny him 3 times. He knew exactly what Judas was going to do. This was the plan from the very beginning. If he knows the hairs on our head, he knows it. This was the plan that was set out where he could give his life so we could have it.
Right. If you bring home a loaf of bread and you need to slice that bread, what are you going to look for? Something to put on it. Yeah. If you need to slice it, you're going to look for a knife. What kind of a knife? Probably a serrated knife, a bread knife, something that is suited to what you need it to do. And I know I've said this before, genius isn't the right word because it's not enough. But the omniscience of God, knowing before time and at the end of time, he could say, here's Judas, he fits the bill. We need somebody to betray Jesus, and we need somebody who will betray my son on his own volition. We need somebody who will betray my son based on his desire for earthly wealth. We need somebody who we can count on. Isn't that a funny way to look at it? Who's going to fulfill my will of betraying my son into the hands of sinners? And Judas is the guy. Not because he's being forced to be the guy, but because he's a serrated knife.
And who knows better?
Right.
Nobody knows better than God.
Right, exactly. A bunch of hands. How many hands? Harold and Billy, I seen your hand.
Well, go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead, Bill.
And back when I talked about the other apostles being indignant, the fact that the oil was taken and used on anointing, and it says later in that chapter, as it's talked about that whoever dips his hand in this up here is going to betray me. And all the apostles asked him, Lord, is it I? Is it I? And then he got down to verse 26 in Matthew 26. And Jesus said, when he betrayed him, asked the master, is it I? And the Lord said, it is you. Go do what thou must do. He knew, but yet all the other apostles, am I going to betray the Lord? Am I going to betray the Lord? They're indignant about the oil, but yet they're concerned about it. He said, somebody's going to betray me. And they start questioning among themselves. And Judas even has the gall to say, Lord, is it I? Knowing that it is, and he's already done it. And the Lord said, yes, it is.
Yeah. And to me, it speaks well of the character of the other apostles that they would at least question themselves. Am I somebody who could do this? Instead of saying, well, not me, I would never do that. Peter's already said that, and now he's probably with the others who's saying, well, is it me? Would it be me? Harold.
Person that would choose with Satan's influence to do what he did. I don't believe God dictated the fact that Judas, you're it.
Well, no, I don't mean to say that he was forced into it or he was in any way coerced. It was his choice, and I think that's what Luke is pointing out for us here, that Satan entered his heart. And we know from what James says, chapter 4 and verse 7, what happens if you resist Satan? Satan will flee from him. Now, that didn't become a truth when James wrote it. That's always been the truth. If you resist Satan, he'll flee. But Judas did not resist Satan.
I think that's an important point because some do kind of question that issue, question, well, why would God make somebody sin? Well, God didn't make. Knowing something's going to happen doesn't mean that you made that happen.
Right.
As a predestined person, God didn't predestine Judas to do this. He's a free moral agent to make a decision, just like we are, to either accept Christ or not accept Christ, and where the results is where you go from. As a free moral agent, he chose to do something. He was greedy. He wanted the money. So I can't see anywhere in the scripture where it says he's predestined to do this.
Right. And even after he did it, instead of repenting and saying, boy, I really messed up, I got to go back and do right now, he said, I'm going to go out and hang myself.
Marty,
Yes.
if you think about it, the word Judas is synonymous with Judah. And it was Judah that basically that turned their back on Jesus. And it's just the name Judas is just part of it. He was used as a show for Judah itself.
And did Pharaoh, we're talking about Judas, we've talked about Pharaoh before, was he forced, did he have to do what he did? Back to the Passover, it took 10 plagues for Pharaoh to finally say, all right, get out of here. He wasn't forced. He resisted God. He rebelled because of his selfish will, and God used that rebellious nature just as he used Judas here. Were the-
All 10 plagues were the Egyptian gods themselves. Each god, the god of mites, the god of the river, the gods, all the gods, the 10 gods, God showed his might by saying, here, this is what I can do to your gods.
Right. And that was the question that Pharaoh asked initially. Who is the Lord that I should obey you? And God showed him, I'll show you who I am. I'm better than any of the gods you think you've got here. I'm the true and living God. And that's what he showed him. And that's what Jesus is about to show. Who are you? Are you the King of the Jews? Yes, I am. Why didn't you tell us that? Because you wouldn't believe me if I told you. He's been telling them all along. And more than telling them, what's he been doing? But showing them. With everything he does, with every word he says, with every character trait that he expresses, he's showing them he's God. And they wouldn't accept that. So everybody's converted to Christ after the resurrection, right? Do you remember what Abraham said to the rich man in torment when the rich man said to Abraham, send Lazarus back? Why send Lazarus back?
Because he was dead. He came back to life.
I got 5 brothers. Send Lazarus back to warn my 5 brothers so they don't come to this torment that I'm in. And what did Abraham say? They've got Moses and the prophets. If they don't hear Moses and the prophets, what else?
They won't listen to one from the dead.
They won't listen even if a man comes back from the dead. To me, that was Judas. There was something in him that was of the world. He went down because we're made of the world, and we either want this world or we want God. And Judas wanted this world. Not even the whole world, just a little bit of this stuff. Just 30 pieces of silver is all it was worth to him to do it. Don.
All this said, I hope I can say this correctly, but I like what everybody's saying here. To try to bring it to us today, if I can get my thoughts together.
All right.
I like what Leslie said because it gives a point of doctrine that they were incorrect on. They were incorrect about the kingdom. They were always worried about how they're going to be the greatest in the kingdom because they thought about it being an earthly kingdom. Whereas so that said, his heart with his greed was okay. Well, Jesus has been slipping away here and there. I mean, what's the big deal? You know, he's gonna probably slip away out of this, and I'll get my extra money, and then when the kingdom comes, I'll have money and I'll be in power. And don't tell his felonious, his thinking with his greed. That said, and obviously it was a thing of faith because he really didn't believe in Jesus as Messiah as it was supposed to be. Whereas the other apostles, even though they had some incorrect doctrines, their hearts weren't greedy. They were always ready on the alert to question. Is this okay? Is this good? Is this not good? And so when they began to understand the kingdom better, their hearts were good, so they moved into the way the kingdom should be. And I bring this up because we have a lot of different beliefs in Christians. And so one that just kind of pops into my head is we've got good people. Now those people then had to decide, because Jesus was on site right there, right in front of them, and they had to decide, are you the Son of God or are you not the Son of God? And those that didn't believe, well, they had to make a real decision. And so if they didn't, they just did their own thing. And they continued. And obviously they didn't believe that. So I bring this full circle because I want to bring that. I know this is going to sound weird, but I bring this into what is it? Premillennialism.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so these people across the street, we believe they have an erroneous doctrine that Jesus is going to come to earth, rule over the nations for 1,000 years. Well, let's say this all plays out tomorrow, between us all. Well, these people are going to say, hey, Jesus is ruling from Jerusalem. Right now, he's reigning. You need to believe in him. You need to believe in him because they're going to believe he's reigning on earth for 1,000 years. Now, that may be incorrect because of some of the doctrines they believe has to play out perfectly in advance, but there may come a time when we got to say, well, you guys are wrong. They're not. That's not Jesus. In fact, that could be Satan ruling from that.
Sure.
The only reason I bring that up that way is because those people during that time, Jesus,
mean, they actually had to believe that guy right there, he's the Messiah. Whereas we've grown up with, yeah. And it is very possible we could have to make a decision. Maybe not. Maybe in our lifetime we'll just die and, over these couple thousand years. But at some point, someone's going to have to believe all this stuff everybody's believing about our future events.
Right.
And they got to be correct. They need to be correct.
Can you have a good heart and your heart be right with God and you still have questions?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Who doesn't have questions? The people to me that have the most issues are the ones that think they don't need to have any questions about anything. That's
How long does it take for doubt, and how long does it take for faith? Same distance. And you do not remove the man's possibility to have either one. I mean, you can't.
he's
And
his
God
own
won't.
entity. He has his own will. And
That's
he
right.
makes his own choice.
Judas had his own will up to the instant that he took the money.
Yeah.
At that instant, he doubted.
Marty,
Yes.
another point here about this is Christ asked him, did Judas betray thou the Son of Man with a kiss? He already told the Sanhedrin and people, whoever I kiss, that is him, hold him fast. And you take him. And he comes, Christ said, he told him over here at the supper, who dips his hand in the supper's going to want to do it. Then he asked, is it I? And he said, it is you, go do it. Then when he came to him, and he seen him in his presence, he said, Judas, you're going to betray me with a kiss? Because he already knew that he told him, whoever I kiss, that's him, hold him fast.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating to me because I really thought we'd get a little farther into the text and look at what we've been looking at. We've been trying to figure out about why Judas made that decision. Why is this an important discussion to us?
We're subject to the same decision.
I think that's it.
Christ, or do I not?
Christ has to die, he has to raise, he raised from the dead, and yet he has to reign, and that's our hope. This all brings a fruition of this together for us, which we understand, this is my hope, it had to happen.
We need another hour.
Yes,
Okay,
we
go ahead and
do.
start taking.
Just a question before the last bell rings. Verse 16. It says, I shall never eat it again, this Passover, until I eat it, or until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And the question is, how do you fulfill the Passover? That's the question. Did you ever read about the Passover in Exodus and immediately think, well, now let's see, how's that going to be fulfilled? Because I would have thought, oh, it was fulfilled on that first night when the death angel came and slew the firstborn in Egypt. That was the fulfillment of the Passover, right? No. Wrong.
No.
That was just the beginning. Laura and then John.
The perfect sacrifice had to be given. To me, that would be the fulfillment of the Passover.
And what was the purpose of the lamb's blood?
Over the doorpost.
So that
They can pass it to them online.
God would pass over
And we had that
Israel.
perfect blood over us, and so.
Right. So this night, that all those Passover lambs, at twilight, Exodus says, those lambs were to be slain. And Jesus is with his apostles. And while he's with them, the Lamb of God, the leaders of Israel are plotting his death. How are we going to kill him? How are we going to kill the Passover lamb? John?
Well, just going back to, I think the resurrection of Christ and his ascension back with the Father signals the beginning of the kingdom.
Yes. He was on the throne. He went back to the throne. Man, that's not enough time. Let's do this for another quarter. We'll spend the next quarter doing 23 and 24. We could probably do it. Thank you all for your